Hello, thank you for watching this Crypto Professor video on Bitcoin. The Crypto Professor supports Luno, which is a custodial wallet service for Bitcoin and several other major cryptocurrencies. Right now, they are giving away £10 of free Bitcoin to new users, and you can get your £10 completely free and help support the channel by entering the code BPPBryant, that's BPPBRYANT, when you get your new accounts. Luno has a range of services, including an exchange where you can actually buy and sell based on individual prices and set buy and sell limits, as I allude to in this video, where I say that taking profits around $25,000 would be a good idea. So maybe you can use Luno's service in order to do that. Okay. Remember, if you want £10 of completely free Bitcoin, then enter the code BPPBryant after you've completed their AML checks, so driving license, passport, or a selfie, and your Bitcoin will be instantly credited to your wallet, ready for you to trade or put into altcoins or turn into cash, for example. But otherwise, enjoy this Crypto Professor video. Hello, welcome to this Crypto Professor analysis video on Bitcoin. Now, I'm sure you've noticed, but Bitcoin has been on a little bit of a rally recently, rising $8,500 in the space of 2 weeks to achieve a new all-time high at the moment, at the time of recording, of 28,335. Now, I'm going to look in this video at what I think is going to signify the top of this rally, because we are now obviously in an area of price discovery. The price has never been high as this before, and we need to help us to determine where the price is likely to have a significant sell-off, and I'm going to be exploring some of the ideas as to how to do that in this particular video. Now, this is not to say that we've currently achieved the all-time high. Who knows, maybe $30,000, $35,000 could be achieved in the next week or two. But what I'm looking for is some technical indicators that reliably indicate that we are approaching a top. At the moment, judging on what I've looked at today, I think that there is a significant chance that we have already topped at 28,335, but I'll explain that a little bit later. What I want to do in the first instance is to just give a little bit of background information about what is going on in the markets at the moment, because I don't know whether you have noticed, but not only are we achieving a significant all-time high for Bitcoin, we're also achieving an all-time high in the Dow Jones, the S&P 500, and the Nasdaq, all of which are at all-time highs. So where is all this extra money coming from? They can't be having multiple asset classes, and gold is also quite high as well, significantly so, achieving all of their all-time highs simultaneously without there being a huge amount of money being created somewhere. Now, that money is actually coming from stimulus checks, effectively, and government bailouts. Now, the government bailouts are a little bit of a controversial issue. They not necessarily are quantitative easing or printing more money. It's a mix. It's between bonds, investors who are looking to lock up a certain amount of capital for a yield between 1 day and 55 years, for example, which is the scope of bonds that can be generated, all the way through to actually money printing. Now, this is not to say that the Federal Reserve in the US and the Bank of England in the UK, the two main markets that I'm going to look at, are not printing money. They certainly are, but I don't want to give you the impression that it is all money creation. A certain amount is, and a significant amount is, and we will see over the course of the next couple of years how much those bonds are actually going to be promised or paid. But for the time being, we are in a situation where governments are printing and creating new money, whether by borrowing it or whether by creating it out of thin air by quantitative easing, than they have been in their entire history. In actual fact, back in October, there was a newspaper report that said almost a fifth of all US dollars have been created in 2020. That is actually now over a fifth, as today Donald Trump has signed a bill to bring in $900 billion more. So in actual fact, during 2020, over $4 trillion has actually been created. And when you consider that the 20 trillion is the amount that usually circulates in circulation, the US GDP is around that same figure. That's around about 20 to 25% of the entire US gross domestic product of 2019. Now, obviously, that's going to be a lot lower in 2020 with the pandemic going on. Now, this is not just a US issue. We've also had the same thing happen in the UK, where $220 billion has been created, £220 billion, rather, I should say, which is around about $300 billion. has been created over the course of 2020, and with no end in sight. We're currently still very much locked down here in the UK with a new strain of coronavirus having been identified. However, I am sidetracking. So let's go and have a look at the actual dollar strength itself. Now, this is the DXY. Okay, so this is the dollar strength against several reserve currencies, okay, usually large global currencies like the euro, the yen, etc. You can look it up, just search DXY if you actually want to know the percentages. But what you can see is throughout the entirety of 2020, going all the way back to March, about March we had a huge influx of dollars into their respective units to make sure that people had liquidity to survive. This is when Bitcoin actually collapsed completely, and most assets also collapsed significantly because people were very uncertain as to what was going to happen in the future due to the coronavirus. Then we've steadily been losing dollar strength all the way down to 2018 levels, early 2018 levels at the moment. Okay, but this is a quite deceptive picture because it's tallied against the euro and against the British pound and against the Japanese yen, and all those have also been systematically debasing their currencies as well. So this chart doesn't actually show the true picture. All it does show is that the dollar is weakening on average. In actual fact, there are hedge fund managers and traders out there who significantly believe that the dollar is going to lose 36% of its value this year. Now, that's important because when you're comparing and contrasting an asset against another asset, so for example Bitcoin against the US dollar, it's good to know what the other side is actually doing. And at the moment, the dollar is historically weak, which means that there is all the more room for Bitcoin to climb, or any asset in fact that is globally traded against the US dollar. So there's that context just to put in the background as well, and that fundamental analysis. Not only that, but the World and His Wife has been discussing Bitcoin and actually talking about it, including major companies who are now buying cryptocurrency, in particular Bitcoin. They're not really looking at anything else. They're not really looking at altcoins. They're just looking at Bitcoin. And they're becoming the new whales, if you like, of the cryptocurrency market. We've got MicroStrategy, Ruffer Investments, Galaxy Digital Holdings, Square, which is the payment provider, Voyager Digital, Hut 8 Mining Corp, Bit Digital, etc., all the way down. However, they only own, well, less than 1% of the entire cryptocurrency markets or Bitcoin markets. So that is a very small amount, judging by the headlines that have been circulating about these companies getting involved. Now, this is the thin end of the wedge, definitely, because more companies could get involved. However, with the price around about the $27,000 region, I'm guessing it's probably out of reach for the majority of companies at the moment who may feel that the asset is quite overpriced. That's why I'm supporting the idea that we are going to start to see a little bit of a sell-off shortly. Not to mention that every single company who's invested so far is in a healthy amount of profit, with the smallest being around about 70% or so in profit, or 40% for Ruffer Investments, etc. But that's an investment company, so they'll have you'd think, a longer term strategy for what they're going to do with their 45,000 BTC. So despite the waves that these companies are making by buying Bitcoin, they actually don't really own that much. In actual fact, if you look, obviously over $1.5 billion of profit, which could be removed at any second if those companies decide to liquidate their portfolios because they have a little bit of a problem with cash flow, for example. But if you actually look at the top Bitcoin wallets, the Bitcoin rich list, as it is known, there are over 100 accounts that have at least 10,000 BTC in them. So if we scroll all the way down here, you'll actually see there are over 199 actually, in fact, that have over 10,000 BTC, which theoretically could be liquidated at any time. Now, some of these are a little bit more complicated. Some of them, like this, for example, is a Huobi wallet, which actually, comprises probably many people's investments. So that's a little bit of a misnomer there. But you can see that in the grand scheme of things, the comparison between these two, the largest holder is MicroStrategy with 70,000. So if we compare that to the number of largest accounts, you'll see that that's actually the 6th largest accounts at the moment. Okay, so in the grand scheme of things, there are larger whales out there in terms of BTC, but having said that, it's not really going to affect the price too much. neither here nor there at the moment with the amount of companies coming on board. What this may do is it might encourage other companies to consider investing, say for example Apple or Amazon, and if they decided to put 1% of their holdings into Bitcoin, the price could very quickly double or triple extremely quickly because of the excitement and euphoria that would create. However, I thought that was important just to demonstrate there could be $1.5 billion of capital removed from the market capitalization if every single company decided to sell at this current price. What is the current market capitalization? Well, it's around about $500 billion. So that's only around about 3% of the market capitalization. So there's only 3% of the market capitalization currently locked up in this asset. So yeah, 0.3%, sorry, I should say, locked up in this asset at the moment. So it's a story, and it's certainly great for adoption, but it's nothing to particularly concern yourself if you're trading for the long term, or if you're not particularly concerned about greed or fear, uncertainty, and doubt. I think that this is going to be a short-term movement for companies to invest in Bitcoin. These companies will win if they sell out here. They'll make a nice tidy profit. But I think the volatility when it comes back to the market will intimidate the majority of companies from actually holding these cryptocurrencies. Because remember, the last time it was up at all-time high, it was 3 years before it approached its high again. And a lot of company balance sheets won't take that type of punishment. Okay? Or are reluctant to take that type of punishment. But let's actually just get to what is happening at the moment. So, in terms of percentage, we are back at 70% or 72% for Bitcoin dominance against altcoins. Okay. Now, what's the significance of this? Well, the last time we had a dominance of 70%, or the first time I should say, was just before the altcoin season. The first altcoin season, where we saw Ripple go from hardly anything up to $3, and we saw the majority of other cryptocurrencies move thousands and thousands of percent very, very swiftly. And this is what you can see here. This is effectively Bitcoin being liquidated into those other assets for people to have a double profit effect. So people had bought Bitcoin here, they profited on it, and they decided they wanted to have more profits, so they bought their specified altcoins, causing those prices to increase and causing the price of Bitcoin to collapse down to a low of around 38% of the market. Now, could this happen again? Well, it happened back in September and August 2019 when we had that pump for Bitcoin up to around about $12,700, but it didn't break out. And altcoins did move a little bit in situ, but we didn't really see anything significant, probably because there wasn't any mainstream adoption happening with companies. This time, however, we do have mainstream adoption happening. So we could bounce off here quite quickly and have another resurgence, another altcoin season. Or we could continue a little bit higher and see the 75 to 80% region if Bitcoin does decide to do a major upward trajectory movement, say to $30,000 to $35,000 at the moment. Whatever happens, we will see at some point a sell-off and a correction back down to predetermined levels, and ideally at some point I would like to see that go below the 57% Bitcoin dominance in the market as altcoins take over and do their own thing. If you look at altcoins at the moment, there's a lot of fear, uncertainty and doubt in the market. It's the exact opposite of where Bitcoin is. Everyone is greedy about Bitcoin and everyone wants to push their profits to the maximum and is being rewarded for that at the moment. However, the exact opposite is happening. Most altcoins at the moment are, at least against Bitcoin, at their all-time lows, if not their all-time lows in dollars as well. So there's a lot of fear, uncertainty and doubt from major cryptocurrency projects that are altcoins at the moment, including Ripple, which I've discussed in a previous video, but that's for different reasons entirely. Ethereum is chugging along and tracking Bitcoin to a certain extent and correlating with it, but it's still nowhere near its all-time high of $1,500. It's only about 50% of the way so far, and it has had quite a dramatic rally. So let's look at the market capitalization in dollar terms. So we're at 500 billion, which is the highest it has ever been. We achieved a previous all-time high for the crypto markets and Bitcoin in general back in 2018-17, December of 330. So we're a good third above that at the moment. And interestingly, if I just off the top of my head do a fib on that, I wonder if it lines up. Bear with me a second whilst I do that. So if I take the high and the low and plot that accordingly, where are we? Okay, so yeah, fantastic. Look at that. So we're spot on the 0.618 at the moment. Okay, so if I take the high of the previous market cap and compare it with roughly the low, we are bang on right now where we need to be for me to consider getting out of this market if this was a regular trading market, which didn't have a lot of people getting overly excited all the time about their cryptocurrency, particularly Bitcoin. I'm not ruling out a further extension, but what I am saying is the parameters are starting to look right for this to start to come down with a fairly swift vigor. Okay, so that's nice. Technical wise, let's just look at some of the text to see whether we can actually start to see this on the market cap. I'm going to delete the fib for now. So let's look at the RSI for a start. And this is a day chart that I'm looking at the moment. So we've peaked here, and then we had a further movement up. Notice that we didn't see a further high for the RSI, and that is what's known as negative divergence. Okay, so we've had a higher peak in the price, if you like, or the market capitalization, but no higher peak in the RSI. In actual fact, we're staying around the 77 region. That is a first indicator that things could be topping. The MACD is too spaced out on a time dimension for us to see anything in particular. However, it is slightly starting to curl off, and I suspect if I, yeah, there we go, fantastic. If I move down to a 4 hour, we can actually see that that's crossed over now. Okay, so we've got a firm cross on the 4 hour charts. I reckon with a couple more days, we'll actually start to see the day chart start to crawl over, and we could start to see a correction of sorts. On the ADX, we're still looking very bullish. That trend is around about 53, so it's still a very strong trend. Once again, looking at the 4 hour, we've started to turn over. Still no crossover on the green and red lines there. Notice that we did have a brief cross around here, but that was invalidated. Let's look now at the 1 hour and see whether we're crossed. Yes, we have crossed. Okay, so we are crossed here. So on smaller time frames, that's going to be a theme that I continue throughout this video. On smaller time frames, they are starting to warn us that there could be a significant pullback as people take profits. But at the moment, the higher time frames, because these are all lagging indicators, they are not showing us a clear picture yet, and that is something that I'm going to return to shortly. Where would I take profit on Bitcoin? So this is a similar fib to the market capitalization, okay? And you'll notice that this is exactly the same fib that I published in my video around about 4 or 5 weeks ago, when Bitcoin was around about the $14,000 region. And I said, if Bitcoin reaches its all-time high again and continues through, where would I take profits? Well, I said I would take profit at 25,200, 26.60 ultimately, and ultimately the highest possible price I would consider taking profit would be 28,687. Now we've almost reached that. Okay, we reached 28,335, so we didn't quite get the full momentum. There is a possibility we still haven't seen the all-time high at the moment for Bitcoin, and there may be one further movement up. For example, if there was some bullish news that came out about a major company continuing to invest in Bitcoin at this price. But people are starting to get wary, traders are starting to get wary. Anyone who's looking at these charts in the same way that I am is starting to notice that things are looking very, very overbought, and there's a lot of maneuverability to the downside, okay, which I'll continue to talk about a little bit later. So, apologies for the messy chart, but I wanted to put everything on one page, basically. This is what happened back in 2017, just to give you an indication or a flavor as to what the market was telling us around the last time Bitcoin created a new all-time high in price discovery. Now you'll notice that the price actually topped on the 17th of December. That was the date that I was alluding to, the spooky dates, December to December, 3 years. Okay, but notice none of the text really indicated, apart from the RSI, which is interesting, where there was negative divergence. So we did have a peak or a new all-time high prematurely at 17.2 or thereabouts, and the RSI did indicate that. And then we had a new all-time high at the peak here. We actually had negative divergence because this peak is lower than this peak. Okay, notice the MACD took some time to actually catch up. It wasn't until the 19th of December, after we've had a significant drop, that we actually started to notice that the MACD was rolling over. Let's have a look at the 4 hour just to see whether that is going to continue the same story, and that has drawn me back to present day, so I'm going to have to just rewind that. Okay, so if we just zoom in there, yeah, so we have a crossover there. MACD comes down. The ADX was bullish all the way up and then had a peak and then started to come back down again. Notice that trend line also trading down here, and then we had a firm cross as the 2018 bear market effectively settled in. Now I just want to talk a little bit about this, which is the Ichimoku cloud, basically. Okay, and this allows a trader to see what happens to the price based on bullish and bearish trends. Okay, so you'll notice that when this patch of cloud is green, okay, that's indicating a bullish sentiment, and when it's red, it's a bearish sentiment. So notice how late this actually crosses over. It doesn't cross over until all the way into, well, on this chart, August 2019, where we see that crossover. But if I go all the way back to the previous peak or all-time high, we've got that there, and we still have the same kind of effect. We still have this green bullishness and then a cross in February, 9th of February 2018, so very, very late indeed, after all this price action has happened and the price has dropped significantly down to its $7,000 region. So a definite not much need for an indicator on that there. So yeah, once again, drop there, huge drop down here, and notice that we did actually have a crossover on the 21st of December here, so still after this significant drop here. So I think it looks like the RSI is actually one of the better pre-indicators of a drop that we're looking for at the moment, because all these other lagging indicators don't particularly show us anything important. And if I actually just go back now at the peak, just to have a look at that MACD that I said I would, just in case we can actually infer anything from a smaller or less powerful time frame, we should be able to just indicate where that is. Just let me find that for you. So we'll just go all the way back to that peak, and we should be hopefully be able to see the MACD being a little bit more helpful than it was previously. And I'm just going to get rid of the, actually no, I'm not. So yeah, bear with me a second. Right. Okay. Okay, so here we go. So the MACD, which is the one we want to look at, yes, we had the peak here, we had the crossover here, but then we had a small movement from 13,000 to 19,000, so not a small movement at all. Just looks like it on the chart, but the MACD was all over the place. Basically, it wasn't until we had that conversion here where we didn't really have any movement whatsoever on the MACD, but it stayed flat. So it was possibly indicating that this movement here wasn't something to be believed, effectively. We did have a price of 17,000, and then it dropped down to 12,800, and then it recovered and exceeded its all-time high at 19,800 and so. Okay, but all the while the MACD was doing nothing apart from hovering around this stable level. Okay, and then it dropped off as we entered 2018. All right, so I just thought that was important to have some historical context on there to see what we could learn from the previous all-time high and what we can apply to it today. Okay, So let's look about trend lines, just for a little bit of trend line analysis to start with. Okay, notice how steep these trend lines are. Okay, if we look at the time frame from March, you'll notice that we're an extremely steep trend line here and a very, very, very steep trend line here. Okay, this will be the first trend line to break. Okay, at the moment it's around about the $25,000 region that I'd be looking to break. Okay, so if I was to zoom in on that, you'll notice that the trend line currently has enough room to descend to around about the $25,000 region. So as long as we stay above the $25,000 region, we are still going to see potentially higher prices. Okay, the next high would be around about the 25,400 region. If we breach that, then we are going to new price territory, and we're going to discover where the price is going to ultimately top out at a later date. However, if we continue to see weakness here and we break below $25,000 and then have resistance underneath this, so we break the support and it turns to resistance, then we're going to recover theoretically all the way down to the previous all-time high of around about $20,000. Okay, if that breaks further still, then theoretically there is another price action point that we can explore that is formed as part of the fib structure that I talked about earlier in the video, and I will have a slide on that in a little bit. But I just wanted to demonstrate to you that we are in an extremely strong trend line here. Okay, so if you hold Bitcoin and you're concerned about being trapped in the market like the people were who theoretically bought at $20,000 last time around and had to wait 3 years to take their profits, then I would set a stop loss around about the $25,000 region. Okay, $25,000 for Bitcoin is still a perfectly good area to take profits. Okay, but if you're concerned about the level of volatility or being trapped in the market long term, then there's nothing wrong with taking a little bit of profit. In actual fact, Nigel Green of Devere Investments, or Financial Advice and Guidance, has actually taken half of his profits already at $25,000 and has advised clients in a memo to do the same. So you'd be joining the financial elite there, basically, by taking a small amount of profits off the table. Now, not necessarily 100%. Okay, if you want to sell 50 to 70% of your profits, that's fine. Keeping a little bit in just in case we do see something extraordinary happen with Bitcoin. But looking at the technical analysis at the moment, I am reluctant to see that this is going to continue for the long term. I think the majority of bullishness has been exhausted out of the price at the moment, and I think that a capitulation and a correction down to 25,000 to 20,000 at least would be very healthy. But what if 20,000 is broken? Well, we can look here and actually see the trend line at the moment. Okay, now the trend line on a day chart is actually quite strong, 56 at the moment, and there's no sign of stopping it. But if we go on a small time frame again, we're starting to see it curve round. We're only at about a 40 on the moment on that, and on an hour chart we've actually crossed over. Okay, so we're actually coming down, and the trend line is now bearish on a 1 hour. Again, a 1 hour is not particularly powerful. Okay, it can change very, very quickly, but because we're dealing with lagging indicators here, we have to look at the price action as it happens, and obviously a day chart and a 4 hour chart are going to be less indicative of short-term price changes than the more nimble time frames such as an hour. Okay, looking at Bollinger Bands, and again RSI here, we're all the way up in the upper echelons of this Bollinger Band at the moment. However, we are showing weakness. Notice we're not outside of the Bollinger Band like we were when we broke the $20,000 region and continued on past the psychological resistance of $25,000. We stayed around that region as we kind of appreciated whether we were going to break through, and then we did break through. We may have another capitulation here and then a break, or we may come down to test this average, which is around about the $23,000 region at the moment. If we break that, then we're coming down theoretically to the bottom of this Bollinger Band at 17.5 at the moment. Okay, but I've got more accurate price predictions for that later on. Let's just have a look at what's happening on a smaller time frame with the Bollinger Bands. Okay, yeah, so exactly. So we're kind of hovering around the average price on a 4 hour chart. Okay, Once again, we are dipping, so theoretically there could be a little bit more movement to the upside on a smaller time frame. And then very, very condensed on a 1 hour, okay, which usually indicates that there's going to be volatility. And if we look at the volatility, it's slightly coming down to the bottom of the Bollinger Band. If we break lower than this, which is 26.5, I would expect us to break lower than the lowest wick here, which is around about 25.8, and then we start to threaten the trend line that I mentioned on another chart, where we're actually going to break this trend line and continue on down here theoretically to test this lower green trend line. Okay, so where we end up if we do have a healthy full correction? Well, 19,000 would be my first port of call if I was just selling this and didn't want to hear about Bitcoin for a few months. 16,800 would be my second primary target, and then ultimately 13,800, which interestingly is a liquidity zone which has been very highly traded in the past. Okay, so I do firmly believe that we will see at some point in the future $14,000 Bitcoin again. I know that's not a particularly popular opinion with the Bitcoin bulls, but there, in any market, there has to be a correction of sorts, and this will be the standard correction. Naturally, if the price ascends a lot higher, then these change. Okay, the primary targets for me at the moment, if this is only halfway, for example, will be $33,000 and then $39,000. But as I say, I think, judging by the technicals, this movement here, this bullish movement is starting to be exhausted. But say we broke the 30,000, then the price would rise to 14,200, and if we went all the way to 35,000, then we still come theoretically back to test 15,200 or so. Remember, the majority of markets after a while do correct around about 80%. Okay, that's what happened to Bitcoin last time. It was up at $20,000 and then it corrected very, very swiftly down to $10,000. But before you knew it, 2 years later, it was down at $3,000. Okay, we do have huge corrections in these markets, and people tend to forget when everything's green and everything's rapidly rising that there are a lot of risks to holding cryptocurrencies, and they are highly volatile assets, and they can drop quicker than they appreciate. And obviously we're seeing huge appreciation at the moment. The market is very firmly in the greed area, and there's hardly any fear, uncertainty and doubts, and that's causing retail investors, retail traders probably to jump in here at almost any cost, and by comparatively, for the short term at least, very expensive Bitcoin. So just having a look at these charts again. This is the Bitcoin USD of the Ichimoku chart. Notice we are ascending and we've got a very strong green trajectory here. Okay, but if I narrow down the time frames again, things get a little bit more close together, and then on our chart we've actually started to turn red here. Okay, so it is very, very early days. Okay, and as I say, these indicators are only as good as the time they actually present the information, but I think there's quite a high probability, a 70% chance, 70 to 75% chance that we have currently hit the all-time high for Bitcoin for at least the next few months, if not the majority of 2021. However, I can't rule out a further incline. For example, if another company comes out and says they're invested, or if things get really, really, really good for altcoins, for example. But I do expect the price of Bitcoin to start correcting sooner rather than later, as I feel that the technicals are telling us that. A reminder of those technicals again. The RSI is flattening off. When we saw that in 2017, that indicated that we're actually starting to see the market turn around. The the MACD has also weirdly looks very, very similar to 2017. In actual fact, if I look now, yeah, fantastic. Okay, we've got exactly the same situation, okay, where we had a crossover and it's starting to come down. On the ADX, we've got a trend of around about 55 and still looking bullish, but that's on a day chart. If we narrow down to the 4 hour, we're rolling over, okay, and if we look at a 1 hour, we're bearish. Okay, on a 1 hour chart we are bearish on the ADX, with the trend line being around about 10 or so. 25 is considered to be a strong trend, so anything below 25 is generally considered null and void on an ADX chart. So a reminder, If you have Bitcoin at the moment and you're concerned about its longevity, or you want to make sure you take some profits, find an exchange and put a sell limit in for $25,000 or so. Okay, going back to those trend lines that we saw earlier in this video. So this here, okay, so this I would doing trend line trading here, and you'll notice that if I've been trend line trading this all the way from the start and setting my stop loss just beyond this yellow, this orange line, then yes, I may have been wick fished, as it's known, at this point here, as the volatility got the better of me. But theoretically, if I've been putting this maybe a couple of $100 behind it, $500 or so behind it all the way up here, then I would be safely in the trade still. So I would say selling at around $24,000 would be very, very comfortable here. Okay, if we see a drop to $24,000, there's no chance, or very slim chance, that we're going to be breaking the $28,000 price region again for a significant period. Okay, as I say, long term I do expect the price to drop down below $20,000, at least test $20,000 again, because that would be what a healthy market would do. Okay, well, I hope you've enjoyed this video. If you have any questions or anything about what I've said in today's video, please drop me a question in the comments. Once again, like and subscribe to the channel if you like the sound of what I'm doing. I will be posting more videos on altcoins over the past couple of weeks, and I'll be focusing on the altcoins that you care about. So if you'd like me to analyze any particular altcoins, please let me know. Otherwise, I hope you get the best out of the Bitcoin movements, and I hope that this video has been helpful to you to help you set your risk parameters for what has been a very, very large movement on Bitcoin, the largest movement in 3 years. Otherwise, happy trading. The Crypto Professor likes feedback. If you've enjoyed this video, please don't forget to like it. If you'd like more of the same, please don't forget to subscribe. Or if you have questions, please post them in the comments and I'll endeavour to answer them for you. Thanks for watching.